As well. Let me introduce to you our first moderator, Mr. Ravi Velloor, an award-winning journalist and author with over 4 decades of experience in the craft. He is a senior journalist in the Straits Times and has also worked with leading international publications including Bloomberg, Time Magazine, Agence France Presse, and the United Times, or rather United News of India. Ravi is the author of India Rising, Fresh Hope, New Fears, a penetrating account of the decade that led to the rise of Narendra Modi. Known for his incisive analysis of Asian geopolitics and economics, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Ravi Velloor.
Good morning. I'd like to thank KAS for inviting me to moderate this session with Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan. It's for me a personal privilege to engage Ambassador Kausikan in this dialogue. It's billed as something of a straight talk conversation, and I'm fairly sure that Mr. Kausikan is going to live up to the billing. If you ask him, he will, about himself, he'll say that I'm a pensioner. But that's like calling Bob Dylan a song and dance man. You know, he's so much more to Singapore. He keeps us grounded, he keeps us real, and that's what he does in retirement. But before he retired, he was permanent secretary of our foreign ministry. Before that, second PS, deputy PS. So he's had tremendous influence in policy making for Singapore foreign policy for most of his 37 years in the public service. I don't want to speak too long. I'd like to invite Ambassador here to join me on stage. Welcome, Bilahari.
Thanks, Ravi.
You recently published a book or a monograph called The Myth of the Asian Century. And I think that title provides the perfect segue into today's theme about Asia's future in a fractured world. Would you like to speak for about 10 minutes in setting the scene? You could, if you like, start with your book.
Well, I'll set the scene as best I can, but I don't really want to talk about my book because I think it's rather infra-dig to be invited to something like that.
That's all right.
To promote your own book. No,
it flows into
unlike
this.
some other people, I
know who
don't go
you
around
mean.
promoting my own books.
Yes.
Okay.
No, and that's why we didn't have the book behind you.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I call the Asian century a myth, not because I dispute that Asia is playing a bigger role in the world and so on. I call it a myth because the Asian century is at best a metaphor, right? And when a metaphor is taken for granted, it seems so self-evident that you stop thinking rather than it then stimulates thought, then that metaphor becomes harmful. Obviously, Asia is playing a bigger role in the world. But what is that role? What, for that matter, is Asia? Apart from a purely geographic sense. There is a bigger point here, I think, to move away from the book. I get very irritated by tropes that are overused, like Asian century, like Pax Americana, like a new Cold War to describe US-China relations.
Guilty.
Sorry?
Guilty.
I know. I mean, journalists are all guilty of this, and I understand Why? Because,
Yeah.
space is limited. You can't explain the nuances of everything. But from an analytical point of view, it is actually quite unsatisfactory because they oversimplify what are really complex phenomena. I'll give you just one example. We always talk about world order. We always talk about world order being under stress, world order being fractured, world order, one kind of order being replaced by another kind of order, as we heard a moment ago. But what do we really mean by world order? I think it is a fundamental mistake to think of any world order, however you want to define it, as necessarily the result of consensus. In fact, more often than not in world history, the only order we know in the world is defined by contests and efforts to make that contest less dangerous. The most prevalent and long-lasting world order, which still is the fundamental basis of what we call international relations, is the Westphalian order, right? But that order assumes conflict and tries to make conflict less dangerous. When we talk about Pax Americana, right, it was never uncontested. In fact, 40 years after the end of the Second World War, the only order we know was defined by the contest between the American conception of world order and the Soviet conception of world order, and their efforts to make that contest less dangerous. It was only a very short period of maybe 20 years or so from around the time the Berlin Wall came down to maybe when the global financial crisis caused widespread disillusionment with American-led globalization, including among many Americans themselves, that it seemed, and I stress seemed, that there was only one conception of world order. Right? More often than not, as I said, contests define order. We talk about a fractured world. Since when has the world been unified except in the most elementary kind of way that we are unified by the mutual desire to avoid destruction? How is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which we all condemn, I think, in Singapore in particular,
Absolutely.
in principle different from the American invasion of Iraq in 2003? How? Yet, to just use Singapore as an example, we took a strong position against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we sent SAF assets to join in the American invasion of Iraq. Were we being inconsistent? No. We were not being inconsistent because the fundamental concept in international relations is interest. Our interest took us in one way in one instance, took us in another way in another instance. How is, even during that short exceptional period of 20 years or so,
Yes.
there were wars in the Balkans, there were wars in Africa. In fact, conflict is endemic in Africa. How long has a conflict in Congo been going on?
Yeah, Sudan.
60 years or so? How long has a conflict in Sudan been going on? Why don't we make a bigger fuss about that? Why do we make a big fuss about the war in Gaza or the war in Ukraine, but not these two wars? And there are innumerable smaller wars, conflicts, that have been going on all the time. The world is fractured. Now, I tell you this not to depress all of you early on a Tuesday morning, right? I tell you this actually as a message of hope. The world, it was even more fractured when, just to give you another example, Singapore became independent or had independence thrust upon us in 1965. The Cold War was hot in Southeast Asia. All the original members of ASEAN faced China-supported communist insurgencies. our relations among the five original were pretty fractious, right? And yet here we are. Whether you are from South Asia, whether you are from Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, Europe, we have all gone through worse periods of a fractured world, and here we all are, not merely surviving, but have prospered under those conditions. What we have done before, we can do again. In other words, let's take the conflicts, the uncertainties, the risks we face seriously, but let's not let them paralyze us or think that this is a unique situation. There are risks, there are uncertainties, there are many dangers ahead, but these are all in the category of what the former US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, called known unknowns. We have navigated them before, we can navigate them again. Now, I'm not saying that there's nothing new under the sun. What is new is what the first speaker mentioned,
Right.
Technology. Technology is accelerating the pace of changes in international relations to an unprecedented rate. It's taking us in directions we do not know where the end point is, right? I don't know, I'm beginning to read books about the influence of AI on international relations.
Right.
My conclusion is even the most esteemed expert doesn't know. Yeah, and it's quite understandable, nobody knows, because it's a relatively new phenomenon. It is changing rapidly.
Right.
So we'll just have to wait and see.
Right.
My final point, and I'll shut up, and then you ask your questions, is this. I think a lot of the angst, the uncertainty we feel now is because we have mistaken that short exceptional period
Right.
for the norm.
For the norm, yes.
Actually, what we are experiencing now is the return to the norm after that short period. Now I'll shut up.
Thank you. That's a wonderful scene setter. Now, there are many journalists in this audience, and I'm being a journalist myself. I want to take you to this morning's headlines where President Trump has spoken very positively about a deal that seems to be on the table when he meets President Xi Jinping in Korea later this month. It is one thing to have power and another to have the will to exercise power. And this year, we've had a new jibe thrown at President Trump, and it was called Taco, Trump always chickens out. Do you accept this line of thinking about Trump? And what implications does it have for Asia, particularly Taiwan?
First of all, I think it's much better to have an American president who changes his mind than one that goes blindly straight in a straight line and falls off a cliff,
Okay.
It's much better for all of us.
Right.
If you put a kind of insulting epithet on that, it's because all American elites,
Right.
which he has displaced, by the way, are upset with him. But let's be a bit objective. What does the Trump phenomenon really signify? The kind of things he does. I know my friend Steve Oakham is looking upset there, but sorry, Steve, we'll have a drink. I'll buy you a drink later. All right? What does the Trump phenomenon really signify?
Yeah.
Trump, to me, can be described as the first truly post-Cold War president.
Right.
Why? Why did John F. Kennedy, in his inauguration speech in 1963, more or less at the height of the Cold War,
Right.
say that America will bear any burden, pay any price, fight any foe to uphold its idea of order, freedom, and order? Why? Because America faced an existential threat from the Soviet Union. Does America face an existential threat today? I don't think so. China is a formidable competitor, but is it really an existential threat to the US in the same way as the Soviet Union? I don't think so. Ukraine is certainly facing an existential threat from Russia, and Russia is probably an existential threat to some of the smaller European nations, certainly to the Baltic states. Right? Ditto Iran before the recent war that completely defanged it, at least for now, was probably regarded as an existential threat by countries around the region, certainly by Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states. Ditto North Korea around the region. But are they existential threats to America? Now, if you face no existential threat, why on earth should you bear any burden, pay any price, fight any foe? It is time, to use Trump's slogan, to put America first.
Right.
Now, there's nothing unusual about putting America first.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Every country puts itself first. Right? Now, let me come to the forthcoming meeting between Trump and Mr. Xi Jinping in Korea. I think they will meet. I think if I look at America and China, they remind me of two huge mixed martial art wrestlers. They've gone into the ring, they're standing there, they're shouting at each other, they're stamping their feet, they're spitting at each other, but they haven't really rushed at each other to come to grips to each other.
Right.
Because neither of them really wants to get hurt. The complication, now you know this as a journalist, Ravi, and I know this as a former diplomat, now a pensioner, as you said, that summits have to be well prepared, and even if they're well prepared, it's only in movies when the two principals meet in a closed room, and an hour or 5 hours or 3 days later, they emerge and the world is saved. It doesn't work that way. I expect that they will come to some form of a deal. A lot of details will have to be worked out after they meet. But I doubt it will be the broad kind of geopolitical deal
Right.
that some people fear.
Right.
It'll be probably trade and some technology, not every technology.
Right.
Now Taiwan, now comes to Taiwan.
Right.
America has never had a firm commitment to defend Taiwan. In fact, it's a matter of policy, which they call strategic ambiguity. Joe Biden was a bit of an exception because he said 4 times he would defend Taiwan, but each of those 4 times his staff clarified that this is not what he really meant. What he really meant was something else, right? And I think that's a wise policy because we don't forget there are 2 sides of the Taiwan Straits, right? And maintaining some ambiguity is a wise policy because it adds to the deterrence equation. You're not sure what America would do, but it could do quite a lot if it wants to do. Now, I just came back from the United States, and I talked to some friends about this. There is a concern that he may sell Taiwan down the road as part of a broader deal. I don't think that is quite the concern we should have.
I see.
That's not a concern the most sensible of my American friends have.
Okay.
What they have is a very diplomatic concern. Mr. Trump obviously is not a details guy,
Yeah.
right? And since he's probably been briefed and been told we don't have any commitment to defend Taiwan, if there's some form of words put before him, diplomatic form of words, I don't know what that form of words is, but it moves away from what has been the accepted form of words. He may say, what's wrong with this?
Right.
And just sign the dotted line. Substantively, what it changes is very little.
Right.
But diplomatically, it's going to cause an uproar.
It will.
It will cause an uproar, right?
Yep.
If this happens.
If it happens.
But I don't take this for granted.
Right.
I was also in Japan, and actually I was also in Taiwan a few months ago. And there is this, I don't know whether in Europe or in Germany they have the same concern. There is this concern that Mr. Trump obviously admires strong leaders like Xi Jinping, like Putin, and there is this concern that he might get together with, the 3 of them might get together and come to some Yalta-like agreement to carve up the world. I think this is, creating a monster to scare yourself with. Now, Mr. Trump is no intellectual, but he's by no means stupid. It would be a grave mistake to think he is a fool. He's not a fool. Now, if you carve up the world three ways, what is the logical division of the world? The logical division is Europe goes to Russia. Asia goes to China. And what does the US get? Latin America? Is that a good deal? Come on. Latin America has been a very promising region for 200 years. It consists of semi-broken states with one or two small exceptions, right? I don't think Trump, he thinks he's the best deal maker in the world, but he also likes to win. And this is going to be a really bad deal for him, a clear loss. So I don't think the risk is very high. The risk is a diplomatic one, not a substantive strategic risk.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I see a point, but then earlier you quoted John F. Kennedy, and his words on freedom at any cost was probably written by Ted Sorensen, his speechwriter. But these have a way of sticking to you forever, you see. So whatever you might say that he might have said it because Trump is Trump and he's not fully briefed. The fact is, it sets a new marker in. But let me.
Well, the new marker has changed long ago. Actually, we just failed to notice until Mr. Trump, in his inimitable way, made it impossible for us not to notice.
Right.
I'll give you one example.
Sure.
Since this is by the German Stiftung. Mr. Trump is not the first American president to tell Europeans you have to take your own defense much more seriously.
Right.
In fact, I think American presidents have been telling them that one way or the other since the time of President Reagan. Did they listen? No. Can they not listen now? No. All right. So I think these markers have shifted. What you just said, Ravi, forgive me, is thinking in cliches. Right? And that's not strategic thinking. Mr. Trump represents a new America. The world has changed, so why should we expect America to stay the same? We'll just have to get used to a new reality, and I think countries are gradually getting used to this new reality, adjusting to it. Okay.
Even if he doesn't carve up the world in three spheres, there is fear that there could be a sort of G2 arrangement that could come out. We saw a glimpse of it during the early Obama years, but that was quickly papered over. And if that were to happen, and is there any chance of American retrenchment from Asia? Because the last time we saw some of that happen, when they were pulling out of Vietnam, we saw the paracels being
Grabbed by China.
So is that something what should we look out for in Asia?
Now, all the things you worry about, the least thing you should worry about is a G2 world, right? There was a tinge of fear about that during the Obama administration, you're correct. But I think that's much more due to the naivete of the Obama administration than anything else, right? Why did the US and China get together in the first place?
Right.
Why do countries cooperate most of the time in the first place? Because they have a common enemy.
Right.
The common enemy was the Soviet Union.
Right.
No Soviet Union, it was almost inevitable that the more competitive elements in US-China relations will come to the fore. Now, competition between states and therefore at least the risk of conflict, these are inherent qualities of international relations. We can discuss why this is so, but just it is so. So I think that risk is minuscule, right? For most of us, for small countries, looking around the room, I think most of you are from what we now call the Global South, right? For us, there are two risks. One is, of course, if the US and China go to war, I think that risk is never non-existent, but I don't think it is a risk that we should stay up night worrying about because of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence kept the peace between the US and Soviet Union. It will keep the peace between the two principles.
Right.
So that's one nightmare scenario, and the other nightmare scenario is what you mentioned,
Right.
G2, which is, I said, the risk is minuscule.
Right.
Why are these two nightmare scenarios? Because in both cases, none of us in the global south will have any room to exercise agency. So actually, some level of tension between the US and China is not a bad thing. It gives us maneuver space, right? Now, you can argue about what is the right level of tension and so on, and of course, you can't really calibrate it. But, I mean, that's a fact of life. So I think there are many things in the world to worry about, but I don't think a G2 world or a war by design, I should say. That means war used as an instrument of policy, such as Mr. Putin tried to use in the Ukraine, is a very probable things to worry about.
Right. I mean, talking about calibrating risk and war by design, I was at a conference recently where I heard a speaker talk about risk, and he said when you look at outer space and AI, the fact that these two big superpowers do not discuss this enough between them, it's like two cars heading towards each other on an unlit highway without headlamps. You know, that's the way it was described.
Yeah.
So, okay, not a planned war, but an accidental conflict. What are the risks of that happening in this time of AI and outer space, when space is being militarized? On the ground, you have not just strategic nuclear weapons, of which you're saying hold the peace, but tactical weapons which can be put in battlefield use. Do these things change equations?
Well, I think you're right. The risk is not war by design. The risk is accidents getting out of hand.
Right.
I think the risk of a nuclear war, whether at the tactical or strategic level, as I said, never zero, but I think fairly negligible, even in Ukraine. Mr. Putin is bad, but he's not mad, right? Kim Jong-un is bad, but he's not mad, right? They are rational actors. You had only one case of two nuclear weapon armed states going to war with each other, and that's India and Pakistan. And still, neither of them even suggested, in the first war, Kargil, 1999, Pakistan took a walloping, right? But they never even suggested going up the nuclear ladder. The last war in Kashmir, or conflict, nobody called it a war, India didn't come up very well, but they didn't either even threaten, because they are both rational actors. Now, I'm a bit more worried in that equation of Pakistan because it's not a coherent entity, right? So what happens next is thing. So I'm not so worried about use of tactical nuclear weapons. I am worried about the two domains you mentioned.
Right.
AI and space.
Right.
Because they are new.
Right.
There's no way of knowing what may happen there. Because all powers with the capabilities are groping, right? So I think if you got to stay up nights worrying, worry about space and worry about the impact of AI on international relations. I think there is probably, I don't claim to know a lot about this, but there's probably a necessity, at least in warfare, to keep a human in the loop somewhere. Because AI is too logical, right?
Too algorithmic.
Too algorithmic. Even if however sophisticated the algorithm may become, it is still an algorithm, right? So you have to keep a human in the loop. And so far as I know, and I don't claim to know a lot about this, there are humans in the loop, both in space and on Earth when you're talking about AI and warfare.
Right.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't worry about it.
Right.
But if you're going to worry about it, worry about these two things. Don't worry about the other stuff too much. I mean, spare some thought in the back of your mind, but not stay up nights.
Yeah. So, you brought up South Asia in your remarks just now, when you talked about Kashmir. I covered the Asian financial crisis, 97 to 99, and those days, in Southeast Asia, the pecking order was Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. And in Asia, it was Japan, China, South Korea, India. In a few years, that changed. The Indian GDP passed South Korea's. Very soon, the Chinese GDP crossed Japan's in 2010. And, last year, Thailand was displaced as the second biggest economy in ASEAN. And if you look, there seems to be a sort of growth moving southwards and towards the southwest. I mean, the Indian economy is taking over fairly comfortably. Yeah. And even in the region we call the Middle East, but or some people might call it West Asia, there are very good growth stories showing up in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and all that. Now, how meaningful are these shifts for wider Asia, and what should we prepare for in the next quarter century?
Well, power is never static. Power is always in flux. Mm-hmm. All these changes you just described are changes of relative power, not absolute power yet.
I see.
Absolute power still resides in the global north. China is catching up, but that does not mean America is in absolute decline. Mm-hmm. In fact, there are some rather brave Chinese scholars who have said so. Mm-hmm. They have been totally ignored, of course, but they have said so. Mm-hmm. So these shifts continually happen, and they often happen because of internal mistakes. Mm-hmm. Now, you said Thailand has been displaced as the second largest Southeast Asian economy. It's been displaced by Singapore. Yeah. Now, that's ridiculous.
I know, that's what I mean.
It could not happen if Thailand had a proper government with proper policy making for the last 20 years. It hasn't.
And soon to be displaced by Vietnam for 30 years.
No, I think they'll take a bit more time. Vietnam starts from a lower base. But, these things mainly happen because countries make either right policy choices or wrong policy choices. Now, I don't assume China's trajectory is going to be up and on forever and ever. They have serious internal problems, which are both policy problems and political problems, and they're both economic problems and political problems. And actually, I think the more serious problems are political rather than economic. And after a few years, in a few years' time, the demographic factors are going to set in. So these things I don't think China is going to collapse, mind you. Please, that people who think so is mainly wishful thinking, right? But they have serious problems. So does India, so does Indonesia. So these things, and so does Europe for that matter, much more serious, so serious that Europeans are only beginning to recognize the depth of their problems. But the most creative economy in the world is who? It's still the United States. I went to study in the United States in graduate studies many years ago, and I learned two things. And I'll end there because we're running out of time.
No, don't worry.
The first is the two things that endured with me forever. The first is a taste for bourbon, but we'll skip over that. And the second is something that is very counterintuitive to most Asian political cultures. That America was founded by people who fundamentally distrusted government and therefore made central government as weak as possible. Now, that's a very counterintuitive idea to most Asian political cultures because we believe the difference. India is a bit different, but most East Asian political cultures. What does that mean? That means that the essential sources of American strength and resilience do not reside in Washington, D.C. Now, if I just judge America by what happens in Washington, D.C., I too will conclude that this is a country in irrevocable decline. But the essential sources of American strength and resilience and creativity are in civic society. They are in American corporations. They are on Wall Street. They are in American universities. And those endure, and those are strong, resilient, and creative, not because of Washington, D.C., but despite Washington, D.C., most of the time. So I think America will endure. It will always be a player. So will China, so will India, so will Indonesia, so will Europe. So these fluxes in the relative distribution of power, they will continue forever. But they do not change basic structures of relationships of the world.
Right. I'll just end this with a final question before we ask our other colleagues to join us. Last year, I was in India, and I was a bit worried about the trajectory that India is taking under this government, particularly on the societal front. And I went to see a retired national security advisor who'd been intelligence chief to 4 prime ministers. And I voiced my worries to him, and his response was, look, we have seen worse. In the 1950s, we were battling a food crisis. We didn't even know. We had starvation. We had much bigger issues. We come through it. Now, you, as a teenager, you've lived through what we saw as the confrontasi period, the period when there was infiltration, communist insurgencies, and all that. Is there a final thought that you want to leave this audience with? How would you describe yourself today about Asia? Are you worried, relatively sanguine, confident? Could you just give us a few summing up thoughts?
I'm from Singapore, so we are never sanguine.
Of course not.
Right? But I think we should not be paralyzed by worry. We have all been through worse. If we are calm, if we are rational, we have all been through worse with far less capabilities at our disposal. Our capabilities are much better.
Right.
So there's absolutely no reason why we cannot get through this. Mm-hmm. So be of good cheer.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And please give Ambassador Kausikan a hand for his